Hello everyone, today we leave 2025. I'm recording on December the 30th. I usually record the video the day prior, so we have at least here in the past a day left. Naturally here I'm predicting something I hope will not happen tonight, but we will probably know tomorrow morning for those who also have basic European time. In any case, so we leave this with a somber note always from a couple of years, the new year, with sort of lots of problems, etc. But some of you, let's say, ask me to make for the Christmas tide in general, for the holidays that I would like to stress, especially in Catholic tradition, are the holidays. There are multiple holy days during the Christmas tide, so it's perfectly fine to actually wish for that as well. I want to make a video about I can't fish the comment, as a matter of fact, somewhere. That is to say, a video about the European sausage. I would say, oh, Schwerpunkt, if you give way to this sort of popular requests, you will lose the edge here. But at the end of the day, it can't be an inaugural video for 2026. Have something appropriate already scheduled. Here it is, that comment. Holiday video idea, the history of Western sausage making from Rome to the modern industries. It will be something slightly more traditional, but for this very reason, in fact, what I was about to say, that there is so much, even in culinary tradition, it encapsulates the European spirit, mostly pork, at the center of it all, which also defines properly also Christian Europe in ways that other parts of the world could not accept, regardless of course, like the good guys that are also within our own system, as opposed to most of the external part that is incapable of living like that. And I'm referring specifically also to different religions, even though I'm not going to digress on that now, because for next year I also have something interesting on that subject. It was not a point about immigration, quite the contrary, because again, there are millenary strangers in our Europe that again we're fully integrated. As a matter of fact, that's not the point. The point is, in any case, that this is a part of history, and indeed, it's not the first video I make about food, European food more in particular. One is liverwurst, frogs, and spaghetti that I made after a famous sort of slant against Europe back in the day. But we can't continue that. I was thinking of launching actually a series about medieval food, but I didn't realize it was too unspecific. You don't find too much on it. Could put together something more interesting. It's not priority. I thought about that years ago, and as you've seen, I've not really been particularly interested in pursuing that. But again, we talk so much about warfare, we talk about so much religion. So every once in a while, also a video like this, especially for New Year's Eve, can be interesting. I don't know about your specific location. Also, most of you are Americans and/or from lands of the Commonwealth, so to say. So there is, as we'll see now, some British legacy that departed from Europe to settle in these places as well. In any case, this is a video specifically about European food and European sausages in particular that I personally love. I'm a great meat eater. When I was in the womb, my mother had a disproportionate need of meat. It's not like she wouldn't eat it, but not to the exorbitant extent when I was to be born, and ever since, in fact, I continued my taste for meat. I'm a great carnivore in many ways. There is something, of course, brutal and bloody behind all this, but it is something I was seeing, particularly in tradition, is somehow necessary to an extent. I am part of those people who thinks that in general, it's pretty sad to kill this or that animal for our culinary needs, but at the same time it's part of the game, and a game that in fact should be solved from sort of much higher levels than sort of killing animals, even how brutal it can be. That's not the point anyway. We're going to celebrate like that. And I hope this is just going to be a joyful video because, again, for all the things that happen in the world, it's not like, we can always smile, unfortunately. But maybe during the holiday season, that's a moment, if anything, of reflection, a bit of even, not necessarily of hermitage. I hope that you're spending your time with family, etc. But it's a moment of reflection, introspection, and of not much rebooting per se, but it's sort of ritual performance, right? And so something that passes even through food, importantly enough, like from a religious standpoint. Today we will make probably an early history, say starting from the mists of prehistory even, as far as what we know in Europe, where sausage making arose fundamentally from the need to preserve meat in areas without reliable refrigeration, transforming essentially perishable slaughter products, also scraps, organ meats, blood, fat, and prime cuts, through salting, spicing, and encasing in cleaned animal intestines or stomachs to achieve a stable cylindrical shape that facilitated storage and transport. That's the origin of the sausage in general, right? Now, this preservation strategy, often combined with drying, fermentation, smoking, or curing, allowed communities to extend the usability of autumn slaughter yields through harsh winters, with fresh sausages requiring immediate cooking, while cured or smoked types endured without chilling. Usually the beginning of December is the moment of the slaughter proper. And there are also medieval calendar illuminations of the months that depict this in quite grueling terms. I haven't inserted, I think, much of that in the picture because I used just the ones in which sausages were there. But that's obviously it's making. Now, the earliest documented evidence of sausage making dates historically in general in the world to ancient Mesopotamia for different reasons, with references specifically in Akkadian cuneiform tablets and Sumerian texts around sort of between 3000 and 1700 BC, describing meat stuffed into intestinal casings that have, as you know, also an elasticity in particular that allow for being stuffed and sort of but maintaining their structure, their consistency, and preserving from outer sort of bacteria, because that's also how it works literally in the bowels themselves. Now, ancient Mediterranean cultures led foundational practices, as evidence, in this case, most Middle Eastern, Akkadian cuneiform tablets describing force meat stuffed into intestine casings. Among the Hellenes, sausages featured prominently in daily life and literature. For example, the same epic poet Homer, we're talking in any case mostly around the 8th century BC when this stuff was written down, referenced a blood sausage in the Odyssey, describing a stomach filled with fat and blood roasted over fire. Epicharmus composed a comedy called literally The Sausage, and Aristophanes depicted a sausage seller ascending to power in the Knights, suggesting broad appeal across social strata and likely among neighboring tribes as well, because that's also the point. Yes, sausages are not documented in Europe essentially until these, or at least they could be documentable, but say it's more complicated, but they existed from up to this point, but existed from quite a long time, and something sort of very ancient. Here we make the history rather than sort of the prehistory. Roman adoption elevated certain varieties, or at least the Roman ways. That there is the most acclaimed deriving from Lucania in southern Italy's modern Basilicata region, known as Lucanica in Latin. This sausage used coarsely ground pork or beef, heavily seasoned and smoked for robustness, rendering it ideal for legions on campaign, for example. And I made a video about also the caro among the other foods used by the Roman legions, a video from a couple of years ago. You can check that out if you're interested. That shows it's from the early imperial period, so it incorporates a wide variety of food, including some coming from beyond the frontier, such as, I don't know, the Persian fruit or something like that was not present in the Mediterranean. Ancient Lucania, corresponding to modern Basilicata, was a mountainous region inhabited by the Lucani people before the Roman conquest, and they were sort of very pastoral in many ways. They had this very heavy meat-based kind of, at least for the elite, kind of tradition. As we'll see now, the Apennine has a pretty rich sausage tradition, famously enough. Think about the Italian salami in general, but there is also a wide and perhaps to some unexpected variety across all of Europe from a very long time. The 1st century BC historian Marcus Terentius Varro attributed the Roman introduction of the sausage to the same Lucanian workers or soldiers who mince salted and spiced meat into thin casings. Right? References by Cicero and Martial underscore the sausage familiarity, while the famous Apicius cookbook, the sort of famous Roman collection compiled around the first centuries, the detailed preparation with pepper, cumin, savory, rue, parsley, liquamen fermented fish sauce, the famous garum, all right, that also still exists. Telling you, there are some places on the Amalfi Coast, there are some, I think, Benedictine monks that still make essentially what would be the garum. It's called the I don't know. It's a sort of oil, so sauce emerging from the anchovies of Cetara. This region, this place, this locality on the coast, and this is important because this practice was salvaged properly also by monastic hermitage, like that remained less exposed to other sort of means of production later on. But also together with this, naturally Apicius was famous for very elite sophisticated food, so you would add on it also pine kernels, bay berries, wool, peppercorns, and copious fat, concluding with cold smoking to enhance flavor and shelf life. And this obviously was typical also of some of the most sophisticated cuisine of the ancient world, because there were highly treated products that had to be prepared with some anticipation, but also to be heavily preserved to spicing, given the sort of scarce means of preservation with the technology of the time. Linked to the Lupercalia festival under the Emperor Nero, the Lucanica sausages disseminated through conquests. They marched together with the Roman legions, shaping Mediterranean descendants and surviving in the same Basilicata's contemporary Lucanica, the Picerno, which is literally, again, a type of sausage from this locality. At the end of the video, by the way, I will give you some little advice about what it was my personal experience, the best sausage type I've ever eaten. I will not spoil it till the end, right? But if you hopefully travel to Europe in spite of all these sort of weird subcultural issues that, in my opinion, will not change really anything. Just you will know what kind of Schwerpunkt culinary experience to follow. But let's pass to the Byzantines, because there was an oversight introducing kosher. Emperor Leo VI the Wise, reigning between 886 and 912, as we have covered his reign actually in a video, banned, ideally, it's not like this actually happened across the empire, it was blood sausage production in the early 10th century following poisoning episodes. And this, again, could happen in general, given all the sort of the lack of sanitary precautions that we just only recently introduced. But that's also never, in Byzantine literature, some random sort of reference, right? There is something archetypal, there's something, conceptual about that. We're not even going to look at that more than much. Now, medieval Europe transformed these methods into specialized urban crafts, with guilds regulating quality in cities, branding distinctive types of sausage, often tied to ceremonies or trade. In Frankfurt, thin parboiled sausages encased in sheep intestines in lightly low temperature smoked emerged in medieval records associated with imperial coronations at the Römerberg, very much so the place, the historic central square in Frankfurt am Main, that was very much connected with in fact, the election of the German kings and sort of Roman kings as well. Securing this instance protected status around 1860 and restriction to the Frankfurt vicinity, primarily Neu-Isenburg and Dreieich, known as Frankfurter Würstchen. These have notoriously held protected geographical status in Germany, with records dating back to the 13th century. Free of nitrite curing salts traditionally, the Frankfurter, free of nitrite curing salts traditionally, at least, acquired a golden tone layered with parchment sheets in wooden boxes from a characteristic square cross section, though occasional round forms occurred, served with bread, mustard, horseradish, or potato salad after brief hot water heating to avoid skin rupture. The German bratwurst diversity exploded from 1313 Nuremberg Mansion, yielding over 40 regional styles across Franconia, Thuringia, and beyond. Right in this area, as you know, there is a very famous town which is called Schweinfurt, which is the fort of the pig, which you really want to appreciate. Its pork predilection. Now, Franconian sausages tended toward longer, thicker, coarser textures with marjoram as hallmark for juiciness and aroma. Coburg's variant, recorded in 1498, mandated pork plus at least 15% beef, flavored exclusively with salt, pepper, nutmeg, and lemon zest, egg-bound, and customarily pinecone grilled. Kulmbach focused on slender, finely ground Rohwurst, mostly from veal, with trace pork incorporating secret proportions of salt, white pepper, nutmeg, lemon peel, marjoram, caraway, and garlic, salt fresh grilled in pears or anise-sprinkled rolls with or without mustard. By the way, you want to consider how important pigs were, especially in early medieval economy. For different reasons, the decline of agriculture, the sort of paradoxically larger availability in this sense of feeding grounds for pigs. Forests were very sort of for the nuts that the swine ate were very much frequented by the same pigs guards that, as you know, in the Germanic Wehrgild were more important than other people. They were definitely sort of valuable elements of society for their job, for tending the swine. And in some communities, especially in areas like Central Europe, again, where agriculture sort of expanded, but more gradually, kept this greater tradition. And that's also why Germany is a bit like the sort of the prime example of such sausages variety. And we have also splendidly, and I have beautiful memories from all these places, in fact, including for these very reasons, the Nuremberg Rost Bratwurst, thin and small at 7 to 9 centimeters, weighing 20 to 25 grams. Naturally, you can find there if you tour all kinds. These were documented from 1567 with the EU protected geographical indication, status ensuring production only within Nuremberg's city limits. Medieval communal vibes that survive to this very day, the jealousy of the local town towards sausages. In this case, demanding Nuremberg fresh marjoram seasoning and beechwood fire grilling specifically, Standard portions including 6 on pewter with sauerkraut, potato salad, horseradish, or mustard as mains, or 3 in a wheat roll termed drei in Vekla, or Vegla as a matter of fact, in dialect as street fare. Alternatively, poached in spiced vinegar onion stock called blaue Zipfel with pretzels. Then you have the Würzburger, adding local white wine to the mix as well. Then you have the Thuringian Rostbratwurst, 15 to 20 centimeters thin with notably low 25% fat versus up to 60 in others. Blended salt, pepper, caraway, marjoram, and garlic, earning protected indication and inspiring a 2006 association and even a dedicated museum in Olshausen, the first German Bratwurst museum opened in the same year and later relocated to Mühlhausen after a 1404 Arnstadt reference specifically. There is, as we were saying at the beginning of the video, also a kosher adaptation using veal and chicken in goat casings for Weimar events. Nordhessische, 20 centimeters long, mirroring Thuringian taste but coarser and more intensely seasoned, wood grilled or halved rolls with mustard. Then you have Swabia's Rotewurst, akin to Bockwurst in spicy profile from fine pork and bacon, requiring X-cuts at ends or along length to accommodate expansion without splitting. The Bavarian Weisswurst, this is seigneurial and sort of very much in my heart, finely minced veal and pork back fat, flavored with parsley, lemon, mace, onions, ginger, and cardamom variations in pork casings, eschewed smoking or nitrites for pale grayish white hue post 10-minute near boil heating, remaining extremely perishable and historically crafted down fresh for pre-lunch consumption, proverbially before hearing noon church bells. It's very poetic. Eaten by biting or slitting ends to suck zuzeln, the filling, or lengthwise slicing to roll out with fork, or peeling like banana, literally, while dipping in sweet mustard, accompanied by pretzels and Weissbier, contributing to the cultural Weißwurst Äquator, a humorous imagery line roughly along the Danube or Main River, symbolizing the cultural divide where Weißwurst is traditionally consumed in southern Germany but rarely north of it. In other words, the Weißwurst is the land of civilization, all right, the rich German South, the post-Roman world, the sort of the Minnesänger, the poetry, the beauty. In the north, it's something rougher, a bit more rustic, so to say, and sort of this sense, a line dividing southern Germany linguistically and temperamentally. This Weißwurst naturally is much more prelibate, as we've seen it is to be consumed more quickly. Legend attributes its invention to Munich innkeeper Joseph Moser in 1857, though of course similar white sausages existed much earlier, to say the least. Then, of course, we cover a bit all over Europe, and then we have the, in fact, Polish kielbasa, achieving excellence from the 14th century via royal hunts in vast forests such as Niepowomice, a historic royal hunting forest near Krakow, the probably 13th century favorite for Vladislav-era royalty. We talk about 14th century Polish history because it's a moment of great expansion of the Central European kingdom, yielding pork exactly from this chosen place, in particular in game, distributed winter row and year-round process to nobles, clergy, magistrates, and academics. There was also a bit of a German influence in all of this, but it's not like the Poles did not have their own sausage tradition from quite a while. 14th century is also a moment of great development of Polish literature, that hence we have also this documentation in this specific centuries. Smoking prevailed here over drying in humid conditions, incorporating early Italian, French, and German elements, as noted in the Jan Długosz Annals, covering 965 to 1480. This is the chronicles of this 15th century Polish historian. Then you have, back to Italy, in the Middle Ages now, the salsicce, centered on pure pork with occasional beef. Southern styles in the peninsula emphasizing fennel seeds and chili for primary spice. Central and northern Italian, instead, garlic and black pepper. Fresh salsiccia fresca, literally fresca, fresh, typically somewhat spicy, from fresh meat and fat with salt and pepper and natural gut casings. Included pepperoncino types deepened red by chili and chopped garlic. Right. Ideally, if you visit Italy, the best is, it was at least historic, like a very sort of raw sausage, very sort of still, watery, spread with the same knife you cut it from on some good sort of homemade traditional white bread that also, especially in the Middle Ages, was the most prelibate. All right. Today, the sort of the lower value one historically costs more because there is less also demand on that, paradoxically. Then you have air-dried salsiccia sec, utilizing domestic pig or wild boar meat. The Tuscan sarciccia. The etymology of sausage in this sense is literally salty meat, right, to some degree. Drop shoulder and ham with sage and rosemary herbs. You have the Central Italian mazza fegato, meaning liver mash, mashed pork liver, heart, lungs, and cheek with garlic, orange peel, salt, pepper, and bay leaves, prevalent in Abruzzo, Lazio, Marche, Umbria, and Tuscany. This is the core probably of the Apennine tradition. In the south, you have spicier stuff because naturally also the weather is warmer and therefore preservation was sort of more difficult. This is true in Europe if you think about the main differences between French and Italian cheese. The French cheese is much fatter, right? It's much softer, probably grabbed in fat, right? Whereas the Italian one is naturally drier, and we will see better now also how this applies to sausages. You have the Sicilian fennel sausage, adding crumbed dried seeds, distinguished from the Tuscan. You have the Maltese salset, talmalti, mixed pork, sea salt, cracked black peppercorns, coriander seeds, and parsley into short, thick cylinders, versatile for grilling, frying, stewing, steaming, or raw consumption, by the way, when newly made. That's really the best, like raw meat in general. There are also barbecue adaptation with thin skin and reduced salt. I had beautiful experiences sort of with grilling on plein air in Europe. Something you must definitely do, especially in the mountains or somewhere. The French traditions are sort of exceptional as well, sharply dividing, and I will not spoiler everything, also because here there is a little trick regarding the French, because it's connected with, at least geographically, my favorite type of sausage, but I will say it at the end of the video. And here there is a sharp division between the fresh saucisse, needing cooking, grilled, stewed, or in cassoulet like Toulouse, in Occitania, from cured saucisson sec, eaten thinly sliced, uncooked, nearly always pork cured with salt, spices, occasional wine or spirits, varying with other meats, nuts, or ingredients, distinct also from boudin, pudding types. We talked about the boudin, obviously, in the video about the French Foreign Legion, and you all know what I'm talking about. The saucisse de morteau, or belle de morteau, dense and intensely flavored, uncooked, from the Franche-Comté Plateau and Jura Mountains, about 600 meters, using regional flattened pork. This is fantastic. She is truly the belle de morteau, right? Mandated at least 48 hours smoking over conifer and juniper sawdust in traditional pyramidal tuyere chimneys with strong air current preventing actual cooking, protected by geographical indication. In the, again, EU protected geographical one status since 2010. with authentic pieces bearing metal tag and wooden peg at link end. That's where, it's, quality stuff. Swiss practices integrated drying and smoking across alpine diversity with the cervelat, beef, bacon, pork rind blend often in zebu intestines, cited earliest in 1552 by Rabelais as Milanese origin cervelata, large short sausage with meat and pork brains. But late 19th century Basil version eliminated brains, yielding modern smoked and boiled or raw eaten national sausage, some 160 million annually, equating 25 per person, grilled with butterfly wing incisions over open fire as near universal childhood memory in Switzerland, also fried or in salads with bread and mustard, sometimes one day cold smoked. You have the St. Gallen bratwurst, traditionally veal, popularized from 1438 guild mansions in the city in eastern Switzerland, sold street side with round bread or in restaurants atop rösti. Then we look at the north of Europe. The Nordic sausages, finely ground 60 to 80% pork, very sparsely with sweet spices, pepper, nutmeg, allspice, occasional ground mustard seed, onion, sugar, binding via water, lard, rind potato, starch, flour, soy or milk protein. Southern Norwegian grilled or wiener sausages wrapped in lump potato flatbread. Danish pre-cooked, often bright red dyed casings for ubiquitous pølsevogne stands, legendary warning day old stock from Viennese practice. You have the Swedish falukorv, thick 5 centimeter grated pork beef or veal with potato flour, mild spices, red dyed, named for Falun mines via German immigrants, with origins tracing to the 16th to 17th century Falun copper mine where leftover ox meat was smoked and used for sausages, typically home oven mustard coated or sliced, fried with mash rather than bread stands. Then you have the Dutch rockewurst, rooted in Gelderland's 18th century abundance of oak and beech for smoking, detailed in the 1756 cookbook the Volmaakte Gelderse Keuken, made for chimney or room use, using lean pork in small pig intestines, November produced during slaughter coinciding with Kale harvest, for enduring stampot pairing, a traditional Dutch mashed potato and vegetable dish, with modern mass versions adding smoke, aromatics, glucono-delta-lactone for pH and shelf life, bovine collagen casings with beef or chicken alternatives. Types included vacuum-packed, cooked for reheating, or raw butchers needing proper simmering. Then you have the British and Irish sausages, generally of uncooked raw pork, beef, venison, or mixtures with herbs, spices, cereals, and significant rusk or bread rusk fillers comprising up to 30% for moisture fat absorption, and shaped during cooking contraction, twisted into 10 to 15 centimeter concatenated links in prepared pig intestine, prone to skin shrinkage explosion, hence bangers, especially with mashed potatoes. Regulated minimum beans like 42% pork or 32 other, excluding past mechanically recovered meat from counts under EU rules. You have the Scottish square Lorne sausage, rectangular pepper dominant block sliced for full breakfast or morning rolls, rarely exported. The Cumberland historic county sausage specialty is chopped, not minced, pork, chunky texture, dominantly black, and with white pepper with thyme, sage, nutmeg, cayenne, no colorings or preservatives traditionally, long up to 50 centimeters, coiled, flat, circular, curved in the western sort of Cambrian lengths, influenced by the 18th century ginger, nutmeg, molasses, rum imports to Whitehaven port, and protected in 2011 with EU aforementioned PGI status requiring Cambrian production, over 80% meat, coil sale, or rough cut. Then you have the Hungarian Kolbász varieties, vast, boiled, fresh, dried or smoked, hot or mild with paprika, garlic, pepper, rosemary, thyme, cloves, ginger, nutmeg, often bacon ground, pork, beef, boar, lamb, liver, mushroom, bread, rice, lemon, eggs, cream, milk. You have the Gyuli, named after the town of Gyula in southeastern Hungary. This sausage is low beechwood smoked, pork, shalonna bacon with fat, garlic, pepper, caraway, Hungarian red paprika. Winning the 1935 Brussels Gold Diploma, this sausage is sliced alone with bread or in the Lexio vegetable stew rakot krumpli casserole. Then you have the chabi, beke shaba from the homonymous town. Similarly, are protected. They have spicier, heavy paprika, mild, hot versions alike. You have the chamege one that is mild, cooked or smoked. The cherkesh, beef, pork, cooked, smoked. The debreceni, unsmoked or light with pork, beef, salt, garlic. Generous paprika range, red pungent normally. The lech kolbász, spicy for pepper, tomato, lexo stew. The hurka, boiled liver sausage with mayas or blood, varies with rice or meat, salt, pepper, optional spices such as marjoram, usually fried. There are, by the way, so many different, there are lots of similarities. If you look at, for example, the Polish or the Ukrainian sausages, if you look at, again, broader padding kind of in Britain, etc., you spot a pretty substantial similarity. There aren't too many ways of making sausages. You may argue that, you look at some Far East Asian sausages, they look fairly similar into European ones, but the European ones are distinctive on their own as the others. And also within, there are so many varieties that paradoxically add to this fair sort of homogeneity, to this wide variety that is to be found, however, pretty much all across the continent. And then there are different ways of, as we said before, of documenting it. Today, of course, things are much changed from the old traditional days that are also not such where we have this overwhelming amount of information or interest towards sausage production. But there is much about the story still that we already know, and they really can tell us a lot about that culture. And in general, these interconnected techniques and regional adaptations, leveraging natural casings, traditionally, as we've seen, from intestines or stomachs, though modern collagen cellulose plastic is used in industry today, like smoking over specific woods like beech, pine cone, conifer, or air drying in dry alpine air, alongside regulation contents and as protected designations, preserving historical methods. This tradition, this type of sausages are sustained in a continuum of craftsmanship, from ancient portable military rations, as we've seen, to medieval guild specialties and enduring localized masterpieces defining European culinary identities through efficient flavor preservation of animal resources. Now, I promised I would give you sort of the top, so let me see how long this video is, because it's probably shorter than the others. We'll talk about the channel a little bit. The top sausage that I've ever eaten. And as I said before, this actually has to do with France, but not quite, say, in a broader historical sense, because I'm talking Alsace, right? And so it's mostly like a we've seen these places. I'm talking specifically about the crossroad between France, Germany, and Italy, and the technical term would be the cervelas or cervelat. As we've seen before, even in Switzerland, this may have originated from Milan, the cervelata, etc. So it's not entirely unique to my experience. But the cervelas alsaciennes historiques, or traditionnelles, avec cervelle proper, right? The spiced one that is sort of very subtle, almost creamy. Some versions are actually even with milk or stuff, but that was really, it may have actually had milk itself, but let's say the most, it was heavily spiced as well, but it was the most prelibate, the most spiced one as well that I've eaten in Strasbourg. I think it was, the restaurant name was Lerneton or something like that. And that I can remember, that was the finest, the tastiest in particular, sausage that I've ever eaten. It's some sort of cream almost, rather than like a flesh, because when you think about the cervelat, it seems like, I don't know, that probably the fleshy, almost versatile kind of meat. That's not quite that, because there is also a popularization, a different terminology as well, right? And as we've seen, this type of sausage is pretty famous also in the surrounding countries, etc. But on that occasion, I personally had the best. So if you ever go to Strasbourg, that I had the privilege of visiting multiple times, I would advise you also, like, there were pretty good sausages also at Freiburg and Breisgau. It's not even that very far from Strasbourg, especially if you're traveling by car. At the time I was traveling by train, telling you the truth, but in general, they're more than cousins at that point. We're talking the broader Alemannic kind of Swabian background, regardless of also tradition. The Strasbourg sort of dialect that I've heard from local, it's something astonishing. And then I think I have sort of, it gave me like traumatic flashbacks of, the Battle of Strasbourg, of Julian against the Alemanni kind of thing, because they objectively never thought anyone could speak like that. But aside from these sort of Schwerpunktian trips, and during my peregrinations, I must say that, of course, like in Europe, we have really pretty darn good food, and it's not just like a cliche, right? It's real, and it's one of the many things that we preserve still, in spite of great issues. And that can, in fact, inspire very much our lifestyle, like probably being pursued even by anyone else. Like if you're American and you rightly have, I don't know, also European ancestry, you feel that you're connected with that. Like, just know that the thing speaks to your soul, to your ancestor, to much more. And now that I think about it, we will come to talk mostly about, I don't know, livestock, pig herding, as we were saying before. Like, there are many interesting, especially the early medieval, or medieval in general, because we focus on this mostly on the channel, but it's a time in history where there is enough documentation and some more traditional lifestyle, just compare already to the modern age. Here you've seen, for example, like some colonial spices that were already sort of informing the sort of European cuisine, especially by places like Britain and so on. I was reading, by the way, that the Lerneton here, if I read the reviews, was closed somehow around the same decade when I traveled there, was the last one. And yeah, that's the place where there would be this, it was a very famous place, at least it was very traditional, artisan kind of homemade, like, version of the cervelas alsacienne, with also pork brain properly. And it's mousse-like kind of cream, incredibly subtle sausage. I'm sure there are other places in Strasbourg that make. I don't think it was Lerneton either. It was another place now that I think about it, in the nearby. In any case, and again, it's just an anecdote of mine, and you don't have to go there in particular, like if you're just looking for this food. But in general, like, it came from, there are some interesting memories. Now, what to say here? The last day of the year, I remember other years I made higher sounding videos, sort of different topics, etc. But in general, aside from today's topic, this year's been quite alright. Let's see how, from the stats, how much I last 365 days. We earned over 6,000 subscribers. And the trend is to increase. It was actually less than in previous years, telling the truth, but it's also somehow normal, like a 35% less, because it was some sort of saturation at some point. My channel was promoted and so on, at least was by users, literally through comments and so on. We, however, increased both views and watch length, which is relevant because last year, I mean, now the sort of 2024, I mean, was also the moment the channel spiked a little bit unprecedentedly. Here we managed to do interesting things. Much changed with the algorithm of YouTube. Everybody complained about this. It's a real thing. It was probably said by YouTube that they did that. There are much less views. It's more difficult to find stuff. So it's worse than last year in terms of reaching, right? But your consistency has been key to this because, again, we managed to surpass even last year. Probably it's even because, again, at the beginning of this year, there was the still like it had not the first couple of months, the new algorithm thing had not been introduced, but the watch length was surely higher in spite of that in particular. And in any case, just the fact that they remain more or less at the same level means that the channel, I see it, keeps being not just followed, but there are people who are keeping come, and it's while sort of it's become more difficult to attract audience in this sense, still it's become difficult actually for everybody, and this increase is thus more relevant in relative terms, right? So I am really touched by your fidelity. I sometimes say, okay, well, we should keep enlarging, we should do more all together, sharing, supporting, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think, after all these years, we are a great community. I really think that. And I think that it's going to leave a mark. It's going to get somewhere. And this year, what to say? I can't complain about this year. It was a good year for me in particular. There are always difficulties in general, like, the overall balance, I consider it positive. And we are naturally confronted with this thing of, look at the future. I don't want to get to sort of philosophical, whatever. But when I make videos like this, it's also for saying something that I normally don't when, in terms especially of personal experience, because aside from here, the Alsatian tour, but I really mean the fact of talking about food, right? Or, and during the holidays in particular, which is a thing, I think it's for everybody in the world, of course, it's anthropologically speaking. Let's say, I don't know, with Europe, it's not much because it resounds with us as Europeans in particular, but I think there is something special about it that mirrors all the things that we normally discussed in our history videos. And it's also naturally not just about the food, but about the atmosphere, about the Christmas Eve, the New Year's Eve, the Epiphany, etc. And these are stages. I don't know, when you're little, you await with anxiety. You have this sort of fairy tale like atmosphere in the air. I don't know, after all these years, because especially when you're a teenager, you start missing that to an extent, because you feel it less, right? You're less charmed by that. You have this less effect, and it seems as if, the more time passes, the less you feel it. And then when, being a bit in the heat of the storm, you went through things, it's a rare, you sit down these days and you realize that after all, you still feel it. It's still there. It's still something that matters, that has a meaning, right? There's this, I don't know, especially in my family, we have this very specific, let's say, traditions, let's put it in this way. And there is probably a way, like, for example, my parents' apartment is all sort of loaded with also this one actually, but a bit less. But there are very specific, with the tree, with the figures. There's very specific decorations, very specific lights, and so sometimes you find yourself like in this later December days where the days themselves are short in the darkness with these lights that go on and off, that do their own thing. You look at all these figures, you look at all these symbols, and you get lost into that, especially like the Christmas tree. It's pretty big. In my house, it's sort of very wide. It's this thing. I remember this childhood memories of getting lost into all the various amphrax that could be some sort of magic wonderlands that had this very loaded, colorful, still magic, subtle, kind of even spooky atmosphere to an extent, like at least spooky in a good ghostly sense, right? It makes you think about present, past, and future at the same time, and you have all these memories connected with that. And I don't know. As I said at the beginning of the video, it's not like these are the best days in the world. Like, I mean, in history, but so in a broader historical spectrum, we're very lucky in general. But let's say there is always something that resonates in the broader universe with what goes on with us, right? Schwerpunkt, I had the privilege of sort of having something going for years that, in spite of sort of not too serious or too hard moments, but something that really sort of was pressuring at some point, and was, some people would call tough. I don't want to use that term because I don't think that if those things are tough that can happen to you, it's on that you can't stop to it. You can't say, oh, okay, this is the most difficult thing, or it was so hard for me. Not much. Actually, difficulties also harden, temper you, right? You can't quite complain about them. In the moment, you hate for whichever reason, but say as time goes by, you realize that, well, you know what? We went through that. We passed it. It was tough. I, in particular, had very easy life, so I can't even complain about that. And I realize how tough even such things that can happen can be to people that are much less fortunate. And you know that I'm not a particularly, sort of tender-hearted person. I'm pretty harsh on many things because I think that's a moment, but then you do reflect about your own thing. You do. Great part of my ethos derives also from the fact that aside from the fact that I see, of course, the world going not exactly how it should, but in general, not even referring to any specific thing in particular, but reflecting on humanity, etc. The idea of giving yourself a discipline, having a backbone, sort of developing some capacity, and so I think is the coolest thing ever. Like, in this sense, you enduring pain, it's an incredibly formative process, and it's really something that makes you grow a lot. And the last 5 years in particular were very strange for me for different reasons. And every 5 years you think you are basically a different person in many ways. I mean, if, 5 years ago I had thought about my further 5 years prior self, I would have said, well, okay, I'm a very different person from that one. Then from this standpoint, today I look at it, okay, well, there's been a much bigger chasm in between. And I was just thinking about it. Yeah, it's as if because these 5 years were relatively non-stop regarding myself coming out of specific situations, going through, if anything, some again, trouble, again, difficulty, whatever you want to call it. And again, to you, as you know, I've never particularly whined. There was a particular moment in which it was hard, objectively, but then also in these years, I never really basically addressed the topic. And again, nothing particular, like it's nothing. Just I don't talk about it because it's just because it's personal, and the Schwerpunkt thing has never been about me. I never made it about myself. And the reason why I'm talking about this, which again, completely natural things to a degree, unfortunately, also in the painful aspects of loss. There is not necessarily also like death. To that I've always actually responded positively for some reason in my life. Never been much affected by that. I'm very insensitive to a degree. That's a sort of not necessarily a problem. It's something that I wondered at some point in my life. I am insensitive to lots of things at this point. I bet you desensitize yourself, but ever since I can remember, I don't know, blood never had any effect of me. I've never really, I've always been a bit merciless, and I admit it's not. I'm not a psychopath. Like I'm just. It's a defensive mechanism somehow. Not against any particular thing in my past, but just it's the way you grow a backbone. Normal, at least I don't know. This is personally my experience. But I say this and I'll get to the point. There's just another passage you have to get here. Is that the other day I sort of stopped for a moment. As you know, this year I also moved place. It was my same place before too, but I literally changed it. I moved only 300 meters, so it's not like a big deal. But it was a big deal because of the meaning of this place and also this stuff. And I had a lot of time for thinking about lots of things. That somehow during the holiday season you sit down and you start thinking. And this was the only moment in which I stopped. This was the only moment in which I said, okay, all the things I had to do that I was awaiting to do for years because I still couldn't do that at the time, or there was no reason to do that at the time, but I knew I would make it at some point, now have arrived. And I'm perfectly aware that also in life things change normally, and everything can happen from a month to another. That's also why I feel myself extremely fortunate in general with my life, not just because I have sort of lots of security and stability since ever, but because I know that in spite of that, anything can change anyway. Because life, you can't quite fully predict that. You wish you could, but you sort of can't. And I was sitting here, and while I was vocal years ago about this on my channel, I even made at some point an update to tell you about this because it was inspiring, and now you will get better to what I get. What I'm in fact getting to is I realized, and this honestly in the moment, again, I'm famous for among my colleagues because I'm impassible on the outside. But I confess that when I stopped thinking about it, I was still impassible from the outside, but I got suddenly emotional about this, which doesn't happen to me. Again, it's not like I cried or anything, but it struck me as an incredibly powerful thing in the moment that at this point, like for telling you how I feel things, like it's almost ever more shrinking into the strengths that I've built, or even just probably in sensation and feeling, that from 2021 to 2023, I stayed closed at home and I slept during the day and worked during the night for 2 years. It's not like I never gone out. At some point, I did go on vacations. I attended conferences, parties, whatever. But I would go back there and just sleep at night. I remember one day I had to go to a funeral, and since it was in the morning, I was sleeping. I would have slept at that point starting from the morning, like a vampire, right? And so I basically didn't sleep during the day. I went to bed like in the morning of the day after because I stayed again up at night in the same way. And the reason why it struck me so deeply is that, like, who does this? Like, I got because I think I'm a fairly self-aware person in general, and I don't see anything strange in what I've done. I mean, I can absolutely rationalize it considering what had happened in the previous years. What, that I received, as I was saying before, that pretty heavy blow, like in my life. And I somehow decided to remain thinking about it in the night, in the silence. Now it's, what time is it? It's, a quarter from 10. It's dark outside, and it's similar to that. And all of a sudden I realized I lived this, what I call the longest night. And I realized something that's finally getting to a point, that what I've done on this channel, especially from those years onwards, has completely changed my life, or better, it's what I've done because of the channel that has completely changed my life. The topics I started to address, the things I managed to communicate, etc., those were very powerful. And there is some escape from the world that I went through, some sort of isolation, some sort of hermitage. Also passing by today every day outside for looking at where I would not go out for looking at it and say, well, the life was going on during the day and I was just there sleeping. It's something that struck me deeply, and only now I'm beginning to realize that even though there was, a very specific reason I can't defend, I can't sort of, it's not, I must justify whatever, as a choice, probably it would have been better had I lived in a different way. But in general, right, I understand it now, and immediately also connected it with what I've been talking about on Schwerpunkt, that I think is something that I don't know anyone having necessarily gone through. I know other specific people that, let's say, in my studies, if anything, that came up with certain things because they went through crisis of some sort. And again, it's not like, I don't know, mental health or whatever. There were times, for example, before, it is true that before your mid-20s, you're more emotional in general. Your prefrontal cortex hasn't solidified. But say there is, up to that point, I like to be a bit edgier, a bit more, crazy, doing, like, that's completely normal, all right? But now when I realize what I went through and that I finally managed to come out of it, not much alive, but changed, I realize how important it was. And when I look at the year going by, I say that as I went through these things, and as before those times I thought that, for example, I would never be able to elevate myself to certain feelings, to certain ideals, to certain concepts. Like, now I'm more hopeful that after this pause that had some, again, sort of consequences, still some tails, sort of tail strike, no crisis, no whatever, it's something incredibly subtle. You wouldn't understand it necessarily from the outside if you hadn't seen me sleeping during the day in my crypt. It is something that would have not, I'm more hopeful than possibly ever about that one can rise again, one can come to love again. And this is something that I understood also through many other reasons throughout this, specifically the very last couple of years. And it's not much just a good purpose that one has. And the older you get, the more difficult it is to change and to get better necessarily. But that's also where the thing becomes more interesting. That's also when only the things that truly matter end up surfacing and making you do things. I don't know, it's years and years that I haven't even said anything like this about this. Not entirely personal. Here I say it because it's relatable. It's perhaps something that lots of people went through. I remember at the time, when I was discussing, what are happening again, completely, it happened. You remember that I made a video, I got heavily heartbroken, and again, that affected me. Today I know that I was, there's much that I was wrong per se in the moment, but it would have not gone better than what I thought it could at the time. And so I'm perfectly fine. But I remember some of you saying, oh, it happened to me too, right? I began to feel certain things too. I began to, when that happened to me, I began to see history differently. Unless you find that in the comments of those videos, you will never sort of necessarily get what I'm talking about. But I wanted just to share this with you because I never do talk about me, and this is not going to be the beginning of an opening or whatever. I don't plan to talk about me on this channel. It may well be that if we go on sort of in a year from now, I will not have talked about me probably either. I would have not really thought about it, but just like I hadn't sit the other day thinking about what had happened to me up to a couple of years ago. So also now I recognize this thing had a purpose, had a meaning. It's some sort of eye-opening realization. And the fight always goes on. There's not like a moment in which you don't think about that. You don't think about how difficult it is, but how beautiful it is to go on exactly because of that. And I will tell you this as well, now that we're here. When I was younger, I don't remember up to which year I had sort of diary, but not like the type. When I was a child, I had some small diary of some sort, but I didn't continue it. It was just a phase. I don't know, maybe it lasted a month and I stopped it or something like that. When I was a teenager, I wrote a lot, and mostly stories. I wanted to sort of mostly like literature, really. I used to draw a lot and so on. And then I think from my late teens, when I finished high school, to good part of my early 20s, throughout all my 20s, from especially up to my mid 20s, every once in a while, saying, I don't know, every 2 weeks or every 1 month, I would write something down. And I used to think very much loud about myself. Writing has a specific function mechanism that even when you think about yourself, it does not work in the same way. And then from my late 20s, I stopped. And I realized, especially when I was doing it, that this happened in parallel with Schwerpunkt. I think when I started Schwerpunkt, that when I began to make videos, I began to think much less about myself. Or at least that I mostly concentrated up to that point my concern about myself, how I was doing, university and so on. Then I just could talk about things, including those to an extent. Maybe I treated Schwerpunkt not as a diary, but something where I could, like now, I could say something about myself. Then I stopped completely. And that too, I think, it was very interesting. When I looked at it back, I said, okay, I was too weak at the time. I was too... I was never like a fragile person, right? I was always, as you know me, determined, fixed, on the track, whatever. Like never been but I was much more sensitive to things, at least compared to what I am now. I was never, even in that sense, particularly sensitive, telling the truth. And there was some primitive aspect that I liked about it, because I managed also to do, to an extent, more things, like to charge head on. This is something you can't do really when you're young. When you're older, you say, oh, slow down a little. Like let's think it out before, which is wise, but also a bit less driven in sheer, sort of in the moment of acceleration, so to say. And I stopped because I said, this is useless, right? I must be focused on action. I shouldn't, accomplishment, achievement. It's useless for me to even stop thinking for a while and saying, oh my God, I feel like this, but I want that, and I don't know what I want, or all those kind of things. And then things came, and there's also part of the reason why that heartbreak at the time was so painful, because it seemed to me like, not in function of this, but I was hyper succeeding in the following years, and that one came as a collapse. But then I realized also, because I had been heartbroken 12 years before that. In between, I had literally thought that I had lost the capacity of following love. Which is, in my opinion, the most beautiful thing I've ever gone through, like as a feeling, not necessarily like, unfortunately it was unrequited, how you say in English, both times, even though in between I had my two exes that unfortunately did not love. But even those setbacks, that, because at the end of the day, for different reasons, we broke up even there, and it didn't shatter me, is that you realize that these mistakes are all functional to your bettering. It's not just a way of saying it is true that you lose something through it. It is true, were it only about time or energy. But at the same time, without that, would I have liked to be without that, considering where I was coming from in general? So the fact that you have to grow up, that ideally, yes, you want to be wiser since the beginning, but without experience, how do you get? So today, it's a new challenge. There is a new challenge. I will not talk about this on the channel. It's not important, but it's perhaps the most important I've ever had. And it's so deeply entwined here, like this also with my work, but lots of things. And it's better for me to go now because the video is sufficiently long. But I wanted to thank you just for listening to this, because, again, I'm not searching for any kind of sympathy in the sense, or, oh, Schwerpunkt, I went through that too, or this kind of. This is just for saying that sort of the best things happen when you least expect that. But they always come with a greater responsibility. So never commit the mistake. And I tell you by experience, so just thinking that since something comes into your life, this is a simple given, or a simple blessing that you should not learn how to handle. It's always about a new responsibility. If you have that in mind, if you realize that you have always to be careful and responsible and so on, then you're going to do a lot. And then I don't think I need to remind you how relevant this is, given whatever happens around us, to other people, to people we love. We pass on this earth that does not belong to us at some point. So if you are able to see the meaning of your life through this journey, I think the destination will be really a better one, and especially for those who follow. And that's also so crucial. And I'm not going to talk about all the implications here, but just know that for me, making these videos has always had some deeper meaning, some deeper motivation. It's not because I want to have a viral video. It's not because I want to aggress anyone. It's simply like I see a point in doing it, and there is always in someone's life a good reason for doing it. And then how you handle everything across the storm, so to say, it's only about you, and that's beautiful, I think. And that's something that, if you have the possibility of telling other people, like at least giving some minimal wisdom away for free, like for saying, like, you can use it. I hope it gets well for you as well. I'm glad, and so this is not the sole meaning. This is more like a personal reflection on it, why I do what I do, and so on. But just know that as the year passes now, this has a meaning, and it does not end. It does not end. And this is the reason why I also wish you the most splendid 2026, that it may bring you joy and the most beautiful fruits, and what you really deserve, which sounds a bit threatening in this sense, but it is really what you should have, because whatever happens to you, if you think about it, it's something that you can decide whether to just passively receive it, to make something about, and to even, in that sense, win something from in any case. And I obviously hope that everything sort of comes to you positively, as you have truly deserved it for the better, right? And this is really a deep wish, especially, well, really for everyone who has contributed to Schwerpunkt, even just for a single view that left something that had a sort of any general positive role here, and I'm very thankful for that. I don't take it for granted. I'm very grateful for it, and that's why I really feel that you're there, and I thank you for such vicinity, so to say. So, well, we'll see each other in 2026. I really hope that, again, you appreciated this little video for the end of the year. And again, I wish you all a great 2026. See you on the other side. Bye.